Bestsellers unveiled at NK News Shop. Step out in style with our top-selling apparel from the NK News Shop. Fly high with the Air Cordial T-shirt, celebrating DPRK's golden era of aviation in vintage airline chic. Explore the stars with our Nada hoodie, inspired by North Korea's answer to NASA. Or toast to tradition with our Taedonggang beer T-shirt, capturing the essence of North Korea's renowned brew. Each design is a conversation starter. Find yours at shop.nknews.org. Again, that's shop.nknews.org. Hello listeners and welcome to the NK News Podcast. I'm your host, Jacco Zwetsloot, and today it is Tuesday the 18th of February 2025. Welcome Shreyas Reddy back to the podcast studio.
Thank you for having me, Jacco.
And let's go through some of the latest news. I guess we should start with the traumatic funding cuts that the United States had announced.
Yes, that's made a very big difference now. Obviously, all the headlines in the past week have been about cuts to US aid and everything. But at the same time, the Treasury has frozen funds of the National Endowment for Democracy, which has played a crucial role in funding many organizations working to improve North Korean human rights.
Okay. All right. So can you name some of the organizations that are likely to be affected by this?
Yes, indeed. So one prominent example is the Database Center for North Korean Human Rights, or NKTB.
Okay. We had Hannah Song on the show not long ago.
Indeed. Others like the Citizens Alliance for North Korean Human Rights. So we've spoken to some of them here at NK News, and I think, as you can imagine, it is definitely a difficult time for many of these organizations, a lot of uncertainty about the future. So some organizations perhaps are a better place to continue to carry on their work, but certainly will be affected. But others, many of them risk perhaps a temporary, maybe even a permanent closure if they cannot make up for the funds that have been lost.
You mean because they were dependent upon mainly one source of funding, that being the US government?
Pretty much. And I think the US government has played a particularly big role in funding these such initiatives for North Korea as well as other countries. Like a lot of these organizations focus on countries like North Korea, China, various other parts of the world where the US is trying to spread basic freedoms or spread information related to those. And basically, with that US funding gone, there's no clear idea where the money is going to come from.
Gee, that's quite drastic. Are we seeing the work of these organizations stop overnight, or will it take some time before they peter out?
I mean, I think it'll take a little while, definitely. Certainly, funding itself, while the US government is certainly trying to cut it as soon as possible, it's not like the funds that have already gone have completely vanished.
Right.
So there will still be a little time, but again, depends on the organization. Some might be in a better place to carry on for a little longer, some not so much.
Now, you mentioned, so the main organization mentioned here is the National Endowment for Democracy.
Yeah.
But there are also other organizations like the National Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, and the Department of State's Office of, I always forget the name of it, but it's like the Office of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, or the Office of Democracy, Labor and Human Rights. Are they also affected by these funding cuts?
Well, to be honest, at this point, it's hard to say where the funding cuts will stop. Right now, Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency is trying to cut government funding everywhere possible. And so it's something that we are going to see more and more sources of funding dry up in the next few weeks and months, perhaps. It's hard to say just the full extent of what is going to stay, what is not.
And what are some of the actual practical outworkings? Like what sort of work will be stopped in terms of North Korean human rights?
I think essentially many of these organizations rely heavily on U.S. funding for a lot of their basic operations. So anything from, in the case of defector-focused organizations, the work they do, the projects they have, the initiatives.
So data gathering, advocacy.
Yeah, very much. So research, advocacy, like you said, but in general, many support programs as well. So it's hard to see how they're going to really recover from them in some cases. And I think certainly some of them have indicated it could be months before they have to shut down if they aren't able to cope with it.
Have alternative sources of funding been mentioned already? I'm thinking about the South Korean government currently, which has a hostile policy towards North Korea, or the Uni-Korea Foundation.
I think that's something that, one, it's a massive amount of funding to essentially recoup, and so it might be hard to do it from just one source, but also there will be uncertainties. They might not be able to commit as much or as quickly, and certainly the South Korean government right now is going through its own challenges, its own uncertainties about what will happen in the future. So I think it's hard to see where this will come from. And from the US side, certainly because the fundamental cause at the end of the day appears to be the Trump administration thinking that any funding heading out of the US to organizations working on international issues is a waste of US taxpayers' money. That problem means we probably will not see that money coming back. We'll probably have to hope that some others will step up to the plate, but they probably will not be able to hit those heights.
Are you aware of any organizations that work in the North Korean human rights space that do not receive money from the US government, that are not dependent upon that for the large source of its income? I'm thinking of Liberty in North Korea, Link, for example. I think that's not dependent upon US money.
To be honest, I will admit I'm not fully aware of their sources of funding, but I imagine certainly a lot of them, like Link in their case, they get funding from all over, from many sources.
From private donors.
Yes. So perhaps they're in a better position, but at the end of the day, there will always be some knock-on effect as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm also thinking of the Voice of the Martyrs Korea, Eric Foley, who we had on the podcast a couple of times there, very proud and saying they don't get any government money. But yeah, those that do, this will really change the landscape of the North Korean human rights discussion, certainly in South Korea, but also around the world. And it's an area that's been growing for the last quarter century, and now it may have been struck quite a serious blow.
Yep, definitely.
Okay, wow. All right, now let's talk about a very different story there, that Western tour companies had their first trip to North Korea. Tell us a little bit about that. We're not going to spend too much time on this because coming up in the next couple of weeks, I do have an interview I recorded yesterday with two tour leaders who went back to North Korea.
Yes, indeed. So last week, after many, many ups and downs, some Western tour companies finally managed to re-enter North Korea, crossing over from China into the the border city of Rason, so essentially, which is a special economic zone. And it appears North Korea has decided that is where it is first willing to allow foreigners, particularly Western or non-Russian tourists in general, actually, to re-enter. And that is...
Right, because Russians have been allowed into Pyongyang for a year now.
Pretty much. So they made their first trip back into North Korea, about a year ago, February 2024.
Right.
And since then, they're the only ones who have been able to go back, not even Chinese tourists who used to form the bulk of their tourism earlier.
Yeah.
And there were big question marks so far. When is North Korea going to finally reopen? And we've seen a few announcements from these tour companies over the last 6 months or so saying they're about on the verge of reopening. Maybe they'll do it by Christmas, like December.
Yes.
And then inevitably, every time there were reversals, even in the case of Rason, in January, these tour companies announced there would be an return to North Korea with Rason. And then beginning of last week, they said they had been blocked, essentially. And then within a few days, suddenly they were back in Rason.
A lot of confusion. Yes, we should point out that the 5-day trip that recently took place was only staff members of companies. There were no fee-paying tourists yet.
Yes.
So we have not yet had a fee-paying tour group from a Western, non-Russian country to North Korea. So that's still in the days to come?
Yes. As you said, it is pretty much just staff members. It was essentially kind of like a fact-finding mission, planning, trying to engage with North Korean officials and understand what has changed, what they're allowed to do, what the programs should be.
Right.
But at least one of the tour companies has since announced it is going ahead with the tour this week. So expect to see more information in the coming days from the tour companies and then from us as well.
Yes, and the big question for a lot of people is, of course, the what would really show a sign that North Korea is reopened for visitors again would be if there is another April international marathon like they used to have every year before COVID. The Mangyongdae Memorial Marathon.
And that's something that would definitely be worth keeping an eye on, because in the past couple of months, the North Korean sports organization website, Sports DPRK, has published a few notices related to the marathon on its website, suggesting it might go ahead. Now, this could just be a placeholder, a template, which they can recycle every year, but they hadn't done it in the previous few years. And on top of that, recently, Russian ambassador to the DPRK, Alexander Matsugora, said that Russian athletes are certainly going to be participating in that. There will also be Russian supporters.
Wow.
So if now Russians were already allowed, but perhaps if foreigners are now being allowed back into the country, Western tourists, Chinese tourists, then maybe others could also end up participating in it.
Goodness me. Okay, and there's not much time left for the marathon because that's usually done in early April, so it's less than 2 months away. So things have to be cleared up very suddenly, very quickly. If companies want to take in large, amounts of tourists. I remember that when I went there last in 2019, there were a couple of thousand people. Now, not all of these people will be able to drop their plans at a moment's notice and say, oh, I'm going to go to North Korea. So you need a bit of lead time. And all of this goes to show, I suppose, that there seems to be some friction or lack of coordination internally within North Korea between those who would like to see more tourists come because they have a vested interest. They do earn money from this. This is their work. This is their business. And on the other hand, the North Korean security services who get to make the final decision on who comes in and who doesn't come in.
Yeah. And I think we've certainly seen different corners of the North Korean government, the North Korean authorities seem to have different views on these, and a lot just seems to come down to whoever's calling the shots at any given moment. The situation might change.
Indeed. Okay, and our third and final story today is one about outdated neighborhoods being redeveloped in North Korea.
Yes, so North Korean leader Kim Jong Un over the weekend held a ceremony kicking off construction of 10,000 homes in Pyongyang's Hwasong district. So this is the part of the grand plan to construct 50,000 new homes in Pyongyang, which they announced at the 2021 Party Congress.
Right, because some of those 10,000 houses some of those 50,000 houses have already been built, right?
Yes, so they've pretty much been trying to go at 10,000 a year. So some of them have already been inaugurated. And now as they begin the fifth and final year of that project, this is a new stretch, 10,000 homes in that area. And along with all of this, Kim Jong-un announced plans to redevelop what he called backward areas of Pyongyang. So such as Tungmedong, Wolhyang-dong, and Hadang-dong. And essentially, many of these tend to be a little more to some extent, in the northeast of the city. And with this, the idea appears to be just continue this expansion, continue this redevelopment to try and improve the capital's facilities as part of this general project to restore the city, to redevelop it.
Yeah, and these are neighborhoods that tourists are usually not taken to.
No, definitely not. I think it's very much more aimed at the domestic audiences in this case.
Gosh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, 10,000. Now, North Korea is not known for its degree of high tech used in buildings. So it does sound like it would be a very labor-intensive project. Would I be right?
Yeah, well, quite often, these projects typically end up using worker builders, like soldier builders from the People's Army units, youth shock brigades, youth volunteers, and a lot of them tend to typically be involved in the construction of these projects. And so they've managed to make relatively fast progress on them. How resilient, how well built these structures are, that's something that only time will tell.
Yes.
Because they seem to be certainly all right. They seem to be good enough for them to inaugurate, for people to move in. But it's when you build something in a rush, you never know how it will be.
And when we have photographs of these constructions going up, it normally looks like quite old is the wrong word, traditional architectural techniques, bricks, a bit of rebar, some concrete, but it's not like steel frame buildings or things that we see in other countries, right? I mean, when it's painted over, it looks great, but beneath that facade, it's standard sort of brick and mortar and concrete construction.
Yeah, pretty much. I think North Korea is not really looking to push the bar with how it's trying to construct these things. It's going to follow the methods it knows, just try and do it in a more intensive manner, and which is why now. But we are seeing them at least try and raise the bar in some other ways. For example, they've built an 80-story concrete skyscraper in the new Songhua Street, and trying to build a lot of new facilities in the new areas as well that they're now developing. And perhaps most significantly is, at the end of the day, the pace at which they're going.
Yes.
So in April, they're planning to open the penultimate batch of houses, inaugurate them, and then the final batch with them now begun next year.
Wow. God, that is impressive, isn't it? Now, in the article written by our colleague Colin Zwerko, titled Pyongyang's Rundown and Outdated Neighborhoods to be Redeveloped, Kim Jong Un, which our listeners will find on the website, there are some great photographs showing aerial shots of Pyongyang and which neighborhoods are going to be changed. But also, at the end, there's like a little postscript there that Kim Jong Un went to visit the Kumsusan Memorial Palace to mark his father's 83rd birthday, his late father, Kim Jong-il.
Yes, indeed. So he hasn't really made this visit for the last couple of years, but this is traditionally how he marks the birth and death anniversaries of the former leaders.
Right, February 16, 2 days after Valentine's Day, is Kim Jong-il's birthday.
Exactly. And so in the early years, Kim Jong-un was very diligent about these visits. But in recent years, he has perhaps toned down the focus on this, which some say is down to trying to just raise his own profile and perhaps lower the status of his predecessor a little bit. So trying to build up his cult of personality at the expense of theirs, perhaps.
It is interesting that the state media did refer to the occasion by the previously widely used official name, the Day of the Shining Star. That's been sort of downplayed or missed out a little bit lately, and in fact, for 2 years, Kim Jong-un didn't go to public celebrations for his father's birthday. But this year, he went back to the mausoleum, and they're using that name again, the Day of the Shining Star holiday. So it's almost a little bit like one step back and one step forward.
Yeah, I think to some extent, though, we've seen even a lot of this was raised with the Day of the Sun, Kim Il-sung's birth anniversary last year, where
April 14?
15th.
Oh, God.
Yes.
Look out.
Yes.
Re-education for Jacco.
Yes, absolutely. Jacco will take you to a nice camp. So April 15th, the Day of the Sun, ahead of the event and even after, there was some speculation that North Korea had started using terms like the April holiday and rather than specifically using Day of the Sun. But perhaps it was more that they ended up using it for some official notices in state media, which is much like this mausoleum visit.
Yep.
But the general celebrations, they kind of downplayed that name. They started using more generic wording. And perhaps we're seeing that with the Day of the Shining Star as well. It is still going, it's not completely removed, but perhaps it'll not be used as extensively as it used to be in the past.
Sort of a fading out.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right, well, we'll keep an eye on that. Thank you very much, Shreyas Reddy, for coming back on the NK News podcast. See you again soon.
Thanks a lot.
Looking to stay informed about South Korea's fast-evolving political, business and cultural landscape? Join us on Korea Pro, the go-to resource for in-depth analysis expertly curated by top-tier professionals. And now you can pick the membership level that best suits your needs, thanks to our new subscription packages. Starting at just $199 annually, you can access daily analysis and our weekly podcast. Or try our premium membership package, which offers additional perks such as executive briefings, monthly reports and forecasts, networking receptions and event opportunities, as well as much, much more. To find the best fit for you, just head to signup.koreapro.org and become a member today.
Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our podcast episode for today. Our thanks go to Brian Betts and Alana Hill for facilitating this episode, And to our post-recording producer genius, Gabby Magnuson, who cuts out all the extraneous noises, awkward silences, bodily functions, and fixes the audio levels. Thank you, and listen again next time.